Warning: the video you're about to watch contains details of abuse. Viewer discretion is advised.
On this channel, I like to make it a point to try and give you guys enough backstory that you feel like you get to know these people. After all, these people were more than just headlines. They were human beings just like you and me, who had friends and family. And I feel like it's wrong if they're forgotten. Unfortunately, in the process of trying to find information, there's sometimes not a lot available. Even in some high-profile cases, you won't find much on who these people were before tragedy struck. Many of you might be familiar with today's case, a 4-year-old girl found dead, but what I find weird is that not so much as a picture exists of this little girl, only a sketch that the entire city would see plastered on every street corner. Now, I'd like to sit here and tell you where this little girl was born, what her life was like before tragedy struck, but that's just not possible because not many speak of it. This little girl was born on April 24th, 1987, but today's story begins on July 23rd, 1991, on New York City's West Side Highway. The Inwood area and the rest of New York City would be in total shock when the body of a 4-year-old girl was found in a cooler on the side of the West Side Highway. A cold case that shocked the entire city would have a shocking twist and revelation after 22 years. On today's episode of Evil Intentions, the story of Anjelica Castillo, also known as Baby Hope. On that early summer morning, 2 construction workers were walking along the side of the highway while working, when they noticed a strong odor coming from the wooded area over the railing. As they approached the area, the smell only became stronger and more overpowering. The smell led one of the workers to a blue and white igloo cooler. Knowing that this was the source of the smell, the worker had come this far and was curious to find out what this was. The construction worker began to remove the lid from the cooler and tipped it over to reveal what was inside. A black liquid in cans of Coke began to fall out of the cooler, along with a black plastic bag. He began to open that bag, and this is when he made an awful discovery. In the bag that was in this cooler were the remains of a precious young girl. Authorities who were called to the scene at first thought this would be just another homicide for them to look into. But this time it was different. A defenseless child was their victim. The body of the little girl was nude, bloated, and displayed heavy decomposition. They described it as nothing short of horrific. While everyone was shocked by this discovery, detectives still had a very daunting task ahead of them, identifying who this child was and who did this to her. Investigators followed every protocol and pulled out every tactic they could think of to try and find answers. Everything from passing out flyers to residents all around the city, to having squad cars with loudspeakers on the top, driving through the city streets asking for any and all information that might be available. An attempt to find answers, but the authorities would always turn up empty-handed. So other avenues were taken to try and get the word out. The New York Post would run a story and push it out to the public, asking for any help in identifying the young Jane Doe. While the media tried their best to get information, her body was taken to the medical examiner to be autopsied. This is when the case quickly went from bad to worse. The examiner described the child having long hair with 2 hair ties with yellow bubbles on it. She was bound with rope and the string of a Venetian blind to keep her body folded, almost contorted. The examiner was able to determine that the Jane Doe was only 4 years old. She was terribly malnourished and only weighed 25 pounds. The average weight for a healthy 4-year-old would be around 40 pounds. Clearly, what was done to this little girl was done on purpose and done by a monster. As the autopsy went on, the results of the examination only became worse. The examiners took swabs of the girl's body. They found semen located around her private areas. It was clear she had sexual contact with an older male. She had also been asphyxiated, which ultimately caused her death. The examination made it clear that the last days of this little girl were torture. Searches were made through the missing children database, but no child matched the description of this little girl, meaning there was a girl who suffered this tragic end, but nobody even reported her missing. Authorities at the 34th precinct were heartbroken at the fact that nobody stepped up to claim her. They wanted to do something special for her. They gave her the name Baby Hope. They named her this because they all hoped they would get some justice for her and find whoever did this to her. She was no longer a Jane Doe. She had a name, and detectives weren't giving up the search. Based off the bone structure of the little girl, a forensic anthropologist was able to create a composite sketch of what he thought she might have looked like while she was alive. This helped detectives and people around the city put a face to the name Baby Hope for the first time. This picture would be seen all over New York City. The sketch was then sent to the New York Post, who published this photo, asking if anyone knew the little girl in the sketch. This created a whirlwind of reaction, and tips began to come in. A woman contacted authorities and said that on a Sunday morning at around 8 a.m., she saw a Hispanic man and woman, well dressed, carrying a blue cooler along the side of the highway. Her and her husband had been driving southbound on the highway when she was looking out the window and saw this. A huge piece of information for detectives who were hitting brick walls at every turn. The witness seemed to remember what she saw clearly, and while there wasn't any evidence of this, the witness accounts were too detailed and vital to dismiss. This brought detectives to their next step, taking that very vague description of two Hispanic adults and combing an entire city for them. An almost impossible task. More tips came in, some even leading them to a pedophile. A monster without a doubt, one less off the streets, but not who they were looking for. Familiar feelings of a trail gone cold would begin to creep back into the investigation, and the New York Post ran the story again, hoping to bring attention to the case. An entire city was starting to become just as frustrated as detectives working the case, reading headlines over the years with no new developments. But the detectives working this case felt a connection and attachment to Baby Hope. This case was different for them. Baby Hope, in some ways, had become a part of these detectives' families. Everyone banded together and paid for a casket, burial, and headstone for Baby Hope. Lead detective 𝐤𝐧𝐲𝐨𝐷's wife picked out the white dress that she was laid to rest in. If she didn't have a family who cared to claim her, these detectives made sure that she did now. Sadly, when Baby Hope's body was buried, leads in the case would go cold once again. Detectives were back to square one. Years and years would pass. When the events of 9/11 took place, there was an urgency throughout the entire city to identify thousands who perished. This meant using new techniques and forensics that had become available. This would prove helpful in many other cold cases where the same forensic techniques could be utilized. In an attempt to get a DNA profile on her and run it through all missing children's databases once again. The attempt was unsuccessful. There was no match. But authorities knew that there was a chance they could match Baby Hope to a relative in the future, since now they had a profile on her. On the 22nd anniversary of Baby Hope's discovery, a tip came into the Crime Stoppers hotline. The person on the other end of the phone had something very interesting to say. She told a detective she overheard a conversation in a laundromat in Washington Heights. One woman told another that she had a little sister that had vanished, and she believed she might have been murdered. That conversation was had with the niece of the laundromat's owner. From there, they were able to get the address of the woman who made these claims. Detective Giorgio visited the address and knocked on the door, and to his shock, the woman standing before him looked almost identical to Baby Hope if she had grown up. This was Lorena Ramirez. She told detectives that when younger, she was reunited with a sister named Maribel. Maribel told her of their sister, whose name she didn't know, whom had been killed. She remembered seeing her sister's body in a bag stuffed in the fridge. She then remembers the body being put into a cooler later on. The night before, She remembers being in and out of sleep and at one point waking up. She looked into the other room and saw plastic bags on the ground and overheard a discussion. She heard adults saying something along the lines of, "She doesn't fit. She isn't going to fit in there." Lorena always felt that heavy burden, not knowing what happened to her younger sister. She worked with authorities and was willing to go public about the strong possibility that she may be Baby Hope's relative. But to be sure, they needed a mother or father to get a solid match on the DNA hit. This led them to Lorena's mother, Margarita Castillo, who wasn't even that far. She resided in Queens, New York. When detectives came to question her, she wasn't willing to talk. She didn't know English very well, and she assumed that this has something to do with her legal status in the country. She turned detectives away instantly, but they were able to legally obtain an envelope that had Margarita's DNA on it. They ran tests, and lo and behold, a perfect match. They brought this DNA evidence along with the Baby Hope sketch that was seen all over the city years ago. Angelica, she says softly while fighting back tears. For the first time in 22 years, Baby Hope's real name was known. Angelica Castillo. Her mother says she remembers her daughter being happy and loving to dance. That's what she remembers from her short time with her. The news that relatives of Baby Hope had finally been identified made its way throughout the city and shocked everyone who remembered the tragic story all too well. But there were more questions, most important one being, why didn't this mother report her child missing in the 22 years that she hadn't seen her? Well, according to Margarita, this is because she wasn't missing. To her knowledge, she was with her father and she assumed she was safe. In 1991, Margarita and Angelica's father had a big fight while they stood at his home. As the fight escalated, Margarita was done and decided she wanted to leave, and she took her daughters with her. The next day, the dad called saying he wanted to see his daughters. He was their father after all, so she was okay with this. He told her to bring his daughters to the home of his niece where he would be. She did exactly that. He also told her to spend the night with them. She did that too. The next day came and she was ready to leave with her daughters. She asked for a cab to be called, and once that was done, the father of her children had a strange question. "You're leaving by yourself, right? If you leave my 2 younger daughters here. You can take the older one." She was then rushed out of the apartment physically to catch her cab. According to Margarita, she was distraught over this and wanted her daughters back with her. After she visited the girls, she would bring Pampers and other items for them. Margarita claims she visited the location one time and asked a niece of her ex where her uncle had been. She said he wasn't around, so Margarita let her know she would be taking her daughters with her. Balvina's response? No, she couldn't take the kids with her because she didn't want problems with her uncle, and he would be upset if she let her take them. Margarita left the kids there until one day she revisited that same location and they were gone. Margarita had no idea where they could be. One day, she received a call from a friend of Balvina's who let her know Balvina had passed away, leaving her 2 daughters there with nobody to take care of them. Margarita would tell the woman on the phone she would go wherever she had to pick up her kids. She was given directions and arrived at a home in the Bronx. When she got there, she paid her respects and gave condolences to Balvina's sister. Then she asked where her daughters were. The lady's response? "I'm not sure where she left them." Margarita was confused by this and took notice of the fact that this family didn't really want to help her get her kids, so she left. A couple of months later, this same woman called Margarita again, asking her to come pick up her daughter. Margarita asked which daughter she was referring to when she got a response that surprised her. "There's only been one girl here." What Margarita apparently had no idea about was that the father of these children had dropped them off and left to Mexico, never to be seen again. They were left in the care of Balvina, whom they barely knew. She said she didn't go to the cops because of a language barrier. She was afraid officers wouldn't help her or take her seriously. She was also worried about being deported and having 2 other children to take care of. On top of that, she stated that after her and her ex-husband split, things got nastier and she feared being harmed by him. They hunted down Anjelica's father, but he was nowhere to be found. When they investigated further, they found that Anjelica's father didn't only abandon her and her sister, he left them under the same roof as a predator. In the home where Anjelica stood lived another man, a man by the name of Conrado Juarez, Anjelica's own cousin. He had a long rap sheet for all sorts of different crimes, including sexual assault. Everyone in the household knew this. Still, he was left there around children. They were able to track him down to a restaurant in Soho where Juarez worked as a dishwasher. They brought him in for questioning and asked if he knew anything about Anjelica's death. "We are here to uncover the truth, sir. Please, it's for the girl." Juarez began his confession. He stated that he arrived home one night, drunk, and found Anjelica in the hallway. She might have been looking for the bathroom. From his room, he would call for Anjelica to come over to him. "Angie," I said. "Come over here, Angie." She made her way to him. I remember when, then the alcohol made me lose control. He said he tried to rape her, but she began to fight him off. She began to scream, so to keep her quiet, he took a pillow and smothered her with it, suffocating her. He called his sister Balbina into the room. Shocked by seeing Anjelica's dead body on the bed, she began to yell at Juarez, asking him what he had done. But she decided that they had to get rid of the body. That's when she went out and found a dirty cooler the family had in storage and began to discuss how they'd fit her in it. They bound Anjelica and stuffed her into the cooler and called a cab to their residence. They began a journey from the Astoria section of Queens, New York, to the Dyckman section of Washington Heights. They asked the driver to pull over on the side of the road and then got out, carrying the cooler for a few minutes before reaching a wooded area they felt the body wouldn't be discovered. They never talked about the events of that day ever again. In 1995, Balbina died of a stroke. She took the sick secret to her grave. What's crazy to think about is that the first tip that cops had received about someone who saw 2 people carrying a cooler along the West Side Highway was true all along. Juarez also revealed that in the time Anjelica was in their care, she was starved, sexually abused, and tortured. They would tie little Anjelica's body to a table using rope. They did this so she couldn't go into the fridge and get food. She had been mistreated this way over the course of the last 2 years of her short life. Sadly, Anjelica Castillo had finally received justice, but it was very hard to ignore the suffering this poor young girl went through. I know some people might still be reeling from the details of this story. I promise you it's almost over. But first, I have to point out a few things. Certain statements Margarita Castillo made struck the nerves of anyone who's heard her give her reasons for not going to authorities. I can understand someone terrified to learn the truth, but here's where I have a huge issue. In this video shot by Univision, Margarita is seen here telling a reporter something that might upset you much more. Margarita Castillo states that she met with Conrado Juarez after the death of his sister Balbina. Juarez told her she needed to pay for the time his family had spent taking care of the girls. Margarita responded that she wanted to see her daughters first, and then they could discuss payment. But it was here that she learned something truly sickening. Juarez told her, face to face, that his sister, before her death, had informed him that Anjelica was dead. Where? When? Where is she buried? He said she had died by falling down the stairs and knew nothing else. He got up and said, "We'll talk another day." She claims that after learning this, she called and she would never get an answer. She still never went to the cops. If we are to believe what the New York Post reported, it was said that Anjelica's sister, Maribel, remained in that home living with those people for 4 more years after Anjelica died. And this is when she returned to her mother. Anjelica's body was discovered in July of 1991, which means Margarita would have known about her daughter's death since 1995. A neighbor of Castillo, a 25-year-old teacher, stated that Lorena had mentioned having a murdered sibling. She said the following: Lorena would always mention she has a sister who died. We thought she was making stories up. We were just kids. We didn't think anything of it. We thought she was crazy. So this was something that was being brought up often over the years. Other neighbors said they believed Castillo's accounts that she knew nothing about her daughter's death. Strange, considering she did. Understandably, this isn't exactly the type of thing you'd reveal to a neighbor. But even if what she was told was the truth, her daughter was deceased all the same. Still, no attempt to let anybody know. Another thing that strikes me as odd is this video taken from local news in 2013 when Anjelica was identified.
When detectives got here and they showed me the pictures, that's where all the hope was lost, that one day my child would maybe turn up as a grown-up.
Now don't get me wrong, I understand not wanting to accept a truth as ugly as this one. I can't imagine what this must be like for a parent. But if I'm being honest, given the nature of this entire tragedy, nothing about this feels normal. There were also claims that Margarita signed her rights away. Juarez told his sister she should have some sort of receipt and get it signed since she was the one taking care of those girls. He believes she did at some point sign it. Juarez would also tell detectives that Margarita and the father of the children had more kids than they could take care of, and they didn't actually want Anjelica. Last thing I ever want to do is take the word of a monster and give it any legitimacy. But all I can say is that the claims seem to line up pretty well when you have a father who leaves his children and vanishes in Mexico, and a mother who learns her daughter is dead and stays quiet about it. I've never even seen her display a picture of Anjelica. Just wanted to give a huge thanks for you guys stopping by and watching today's video. I really appreciate you guys sticking through these with me. I understand that the details can be a bit heavy and some of these stories are a bit much. This story in particular I have a real problem with. It's just the inconsistencies in Margarita's story and her explanation as to why she didn't report her daughter missing don't add up for me. It feels like in some articles and some videos she's seen saying that she had no idea what happened, even neighbors corroborating that she said she had no idea what happened. Now I get you won't tell neighbors this type of information if you're not close to them, but still, it kind of feels like a dismissal of information. On one hand, she's saying that she wishes she would see her daughter walk through the door one day, and that when the news was revealed that this was her daughter, she was heartbroken because she knew that would never happen. But my thing is, you've known your daughter was deceased since 1995. So how would that have been possible? If you ask me, anybody who withheld any type of information in this case belongs in prison, including the mother if she did. It was the love and compassion of complete strangers in New York City that led to the arrest of the monster that did this to Anjelica Castillo. The truth is, New York City was Anjelica Castillo's real family. I'm out.